So without any further ado, we are going to get started. And for anybody that came in late and may have missed me say this earlier, the power went out and I lost whatever version I was working on. I don't know how because it was on the cloud and it was autosave. So when you see a date that's 4 years old, yeah, that's the presentation I'm using, but it's got everything I want to get. I just had updated a couple things, but I did make that video link. So good evening and welcome. My name is Ken Rostal, I'm park naturalist at Gulf Branch Nature Center. We're going to do a deep dive on woodpeckers. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to find, there we go. All right, so we are going to talk about woodpeckers. For me, I spend each year keeping lists. I keep lists of whenever I go birding, but each year I set a goal for myself that I usually fail miserably at to get in the calendar year for birds. But one of the easy ones for me is probably within a month or two, I can get 7 of the easy woodpeckers, because here in Northern Virginia, we have 7 woodpeckers, and you can get an 8th species if you go to special places in Virginia or other places in the South. And I'll talk about all of them, but I'll give you an intro to each of them. But woodpeckers, I've always found are kind of fun. They're not going to hang right next to you. They're not that bold, but they're often easy to see, and they're certainly distinctive in their habits. And so I think they're a really fun group to talk about. This is a big pileated woodpecker here on a fallen tree down in Gulf Branch. But I'm going to talk about some of the woodpeckers we'll see, and I'm going to advance here and keep going. So I'm probably dating myself here because I don't know how much they've done any new Woody Woodpecker stuff in the past few years. But this is one of the cartoons I grew up with. And he could do some pretty amazing things. And woodpeckers can. We're going to talk about the reality of what they can do. But I've always enjoyed Woody Woodpecker and thought he was a pretty interesting character. I like to get a place, sense of place of where we are within the great tree of life. And so we're going to be talking about woodpeckers. They're chordates. They've got a backbone, so they're in with the mammals, the fish, reptiles, amphibians. Obviously, they're aves. They're in the class Aves, which is birds. This is some birds of prey here. There's I can't remember, 13 to 14,000 species of birds worldwide. Maybe it's more than that, but there's a lot. They are in the order of pisiforms. The plate on the left are barbets. These are birds. There's one set of barbets that I think you can find in South America. There's another you can find in Africa, if I remember that correctly. But these are barbets. In the middle, these are honey birds, not honey guides, although I think honey guides are in this group as well. And on the right, hopefully, I think we can all see that these are toucans and araucaries, perhaps a toucanlet. But these are, this is the toucan family, and these are all in the same group as woodpeckers. And again, these are honey birds, and I believe they're actually parasitic nesters, in that they parasitize other birds' nests in order to reproduce, which some people get really mad about, but I thought was pretty fascinating. And of course, we're talking about the Pistidae family, which is the woodpeckers. The woodpecker on the right is a downy woodpecker. It's the only one you'll see here. In this, I think it's this family, or it might be this order. I think that woodpeckers, if I remember correctly, are the only group from the order that are in North America regularly. So all those other birds I showed you are South America or other parts of the world, but woodpeckers are the only ones that are regular you can find in North America. Worldwide, there's 240 species of woodpeckers and 35 genera. They're pretty cosmopolitan, but you won't find them in Antarctica, Australia, or Madagascar. So you got the Americas, you got Europe, Asia, and Africa if you want to find some woodpeckers. That's a pretty big number, 240. We only got 8 that you can find in Virginia, and there's 7 that are here in Arlington. So we're going to do a quick intro on them, and then we'll talk about some of their adaptations. The downy woodpecker is, I think, easily the most common woodpecker that you're going to find in Arlington. They will readily come to bird feeders. They're very well adapted to urban areas and suburban settings. They're not terribly disturbed by people. They're not, again, you can't walk up and pet them or anything, but they are ones that you can find pretty regularly around here. They are, I think, our smallest woodpecker, and that bill size is going to be really important because one of their cousins, another woodpecker in the genus Dravides, is very similar in coloration, very similar in habits and shape. It's larger, its bill is larger, and it's obvious when they're next to each other. But if you've got one by itself, this can be sometimes a tricky ID for birders and people in general. So I'm going to give you some hints on how to take care of that. Oops. This is the hairy woodpecker. And again, if you don't see them next to each other, it might not always be as obvious how much larger the hairy is to the downy. So here's the hairy and the downy together. As you can see, very similar colorations. You get the white stripe above and below the eye running towards the back of the head. And these are both females. There's no red patch on the back of the head. The males do have a red patch on the back of the head, and that's in a lot of the woodpeckers you may have a dimorphism in size. Sometimes it's in feeding habits and in coloration, but it's a really subtle coloration. If you're familiar with like a cardinal where the male is bright red and the female is brown, they're the same shape, they're the same feathers, everything's the same. It's just that color is very, very different. It's a much more muted dimorphism when you see it on woodpeckers. But you got the hairy on the right and the downy on the left. If you're out in the field, if you're looking at them with binoculars, what I've always found helpful is, because a lot of times I'm trying to turn a really big downy into a hairy, and it's not true. If you could take this bill and you fold it right where the feathers end, if you fold that bill back, it's going to land right about, obviously you're imagining this, it's going to land right on the eye of the downy. If you do the same with the hairy, that bill's going to go past the eye. And that's always been a big help. The other thing is, if you can get a decent look at the tail feathers, that can get you there too. The downy feathers, depending on which side you're looking at, are spotted. They have these spots on there, and if you've got spots on the tail feathers, it's a downy. The hairy's tail feathers on the outer part here are very light white. They're sorry, they're not spotted. They're very clear white. It's just white, and so that's a really, really good way to tell the difference. Now, I'm about to tell you something that's going to sound like a lie because you're looking at the picture in front of you. Downies much more readily and frequently come to feeders. If you have a suet feeder, you're going to get downies. Even sometimes seed feeders as well. Hairies will come to feeders, but not as regularly. And so it's much less like if you got a bird that's this color on a feeder, it's probably very likely it's a downy. It's not impossible that it's a hairy, but it's much more likely that you're dealing with a downy woodpecker than a hairy. Red-bellied woodpeckers. I wish I could do the sound. It's like a this like upward trill that's really common. I learned that my summer I worked in Indiana where the woods were just full of them, and you constantly hear that to the point where I didn't even have to look anymore, and I knew I was hearing a red-bellied woodpecker. This is a male red belly. You can see that the red mohawk runs from the base of the bill all the way to the back. Now you might be thinking, and I think you would be very wise to be thinking this, why wouldn't you call this a red-headed woodpecker? Well, I'll show you one of those in a little bit, but it was called a red-bellied woodpecker by someone who shot it first and laid it out on a pan and then named it. And that's how you see this red right here on the belly. It's just a spot, but that's how they got the name red-bellied woodpecker. Another pretty common bird. Their back is a black and white mottled kind of striped pattern. And again, you see the breast is very light. And again, I think these are really good looking birds. They're one of my favorite. Larger than either the downy or the hairy. And here's one on a suet cake. This is in my backyard. And again, you can see when you've got that red mohawk from the base of the bill all the way to the back of the neck, that's a male. For the female, there's none on the forehead between the bill and the eyes. It's just from the top of the head to the base of the shoulders of the wings there. But this gives you a better idea of that black and white stripy pattern on the back of the woodpecker as well. Northern flicker. This is another woodpecker. They're slightly different in how they, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit when I'm talking about adaptations. They have slightly different feeding pattern than other woodpeckers. They do perch frequently, which can confuse people. You can also often find them foraging on the ground, so they're not as woodpeckery of a woodpecker as you might expect or might be hoping to see if you look for their if you're looking for them or thinking about it. Here you can see they're on these two are both on the side of a tree. The upper woodpecker with the red mustache or the mailer stripe, that is the male, and the lower one is a female, which she does not have the red stripe. And sometimes I feel like there's red on the back of the head as well, but you can't see it in this image. Now these are, actually I can't tell from this picture. The feather I'm holding here is from an eastern northern flicker. You can see that there is a yellow shaft to that feather, and they are often called yellow shafted flickers. If you go out west, if you cross the Mississippi, you will find red shafted flickers. Same species, different coloration. Look at the tail. You can see there's like a salmony red color, and these are red shafted flickers. So if I was holding that same feather from this bird, there would be a red shaft down the middle instead. So I always, it's just such a simple thing, but I've always was really excited the first time I saw that when I was out west and realized that. They do regularly hybridize where the two meet, and so they used to at one time, I think they were called one species. It was all flicker, and I think I wish I could remember the name of it, but there was another bird as well that was included. That bird is still out, but the red shafted and the yellow shafted flickers were lumped back into one species. So if you're a birder and you had both on the list, you lost a species, and that was probably a bummer. The other thing that's really diagnostic to identify these when you see them out in the field is when they fly. That white rump patch really stands out. And you can also actually see the yellow shafts in this wing. This is my expert photography lesson for flickers. You know, I sent this into National Geographic. Can't believe that they didn't use it on the cover of their magazine. But even blurry, you can see the red on the back of the head, and you can even see, I think, a little bit of the mailer stripe there. But you see that white rump patch and the yellow on the wings. And on iNaturalist, at least, it was easy to get an identification, getting that to northern flicker. Our largest woodpecker is the pileated woodpecker. Pileated, I'm not going to argue with anybody about pronunciation, however you'd like to say it. You can see those big claws holding it on the side of the tree there, that really strong and straight chisel-shaped bill. And again, another red mustache. It's like I said, there's some very subtle coloration between the male and the female, but this is a male. That red crest really stands out. Which I always feel is a little reminiscent of Woody Woodpecker, but I'm pretty sure Woody Woodpecker was more based on the red-headed woodpecker, which we'll meet in a second. In some recent bird surveys, the numbers suggested that pileateds and flickers are actually on the rise, and they're doing much better, and they're seeming to thrive. I've seen a pair here in the last couple weeks at Gulf Branch, so fingers crossed that hopefully they're nesting. We don't need a traffic alert going on. Yellow-bellied sapsucker. This is our winter visitor. They do not hang out here in the summer. Here's their range map. So if you're looking at that range map, that purple is their winter range, and then you've got the yellow, which is where you'll find them during migration in the fall and the spring. And then the orange is their summer. The light orange up at the top there is their summer range. So they overwinter, or they summer further north of here, and that's where they breed. And they actually fly south, but they don't go all the way into Central or South America. I mean, some of them do, but they don't all go that far. Some of them hang out around here. And so you get to see the yellow-bellied sapsuckers here throughout the winter from maybe October, November through March or April. I think you could still find one. I haven't heard ours. We have one that hangs out a lot around here, and I haven't heard it recently. It's not as cat-like a call as the catbird, but it does often sound like, if you hear one, like a single mew, and they're pretty common. But you can see these holes that it's left in the tree here. Sapsuckers make wells. They'll peck into a tree, and they leave and these wells will be open, and sap will drip out of them, and they'll feed off the sap. They'll feed off insects that are stuck in the sap. So they're pretty neat, and they do that. This is also these wells are not, I don't know how much they guard them or if they'll fight other animals for it, but I can tell you that there are insects that will feed from the well. There are mammals that will come into these wells and lick the sap, like squirrels, possibly raccoons, and also eat insects that fall in there. And there's other birds as well, orioles. I just had it in the back of my head, and it's hummingbirds, and that will come in, and they will also feed from the wells the sapsuckers leave behind as well. So those can be a significant food source for not just the sapsuckers, but other critters as well. Here's a red-headed woodpecker. All the ones I just showed you, the downy and the hairy, the flicker and the red belly, the pileated and the sapsucker, you can find in most of the wooded parks here in Arlington. With relative degrees of success, obviously, you're not going to find the sapsucker here in the summer. The red-headed woodpecker is a little tougher. I have seen them in Arlington. I've seen it. I think my lone Arlington sighting was over near Fort C.F. Smith. For several years, they were. You could find one in. Find them nesting in Huntley Meadows. I don't know that they were there this past year. Before that, for like 3 or 4 years, you could get them at Huntley Meadows. Before that, I always thought the most reliable place was to drive out to Sky Meadows, which is a park out in the Blue Ridge there on this side of the mountains just before Shenandoah. If you've never been, it's a beautiful spot. And it's a really, really easy place to get red-headed woodpeckers, wide open field. You can get a lot of cool birds out there, but it's pretty easy to run into a red-headed woodpecker out there. This picture on the right is on a fence post at Sky Meadows in the spring. So nice yellow flowers blurred out in the background. Then that bright red head, the black back, the white belly, and then the white patches here near the ends of the wings. And again, I think this is it's not exact, but I think this is the woodpecker that Woody Woodpecker is modeled after. I think a combination of this and the pileated, because he's got the crest, but I feel like most of his color is more like this guy than the other one. Again, I really like Woody Woodpecker. And then the red-cockaded woodpecker is the 8th woodpecker you can find in Virginia. You can't see, I think this is a female. You can see it's banded. They're of all the woodpeckers I've shown you, these are easily the most threatened. The trouble for woodpeckers is, they need mature wood. They need wood that's full of bugs. They need wood that's old. That's what they're going to put that's where they make their home. That's where they're going to make their young. That's where they're going to find their food. And so you'll lose woodpeckers when you lose some of these old growth forests. One of the other problems is for something like the red-cockaded woodpecker, they like pine savannas, but the pine they like is I'm blanking on that. I just read it. I know they don't like loblolly, but loblolly grows fast and is often planted as a management, in management plans. It's obviously the tree that's planted because it grows faster and returns the habitat quicker, but it's not preferred by the red-cockaded. And so if you have an area with the pine that the red-cockaded likes, and then it gets cut and used for timber, and then you replant and restock with loblolly, which grows faster, which besides getting the habitat back quicker is also quicker grow. If you're going to cut it back down for more timber, this is not the kind of pine that they like, and so you may not get them back in those woods. If any of you are familiar with the ivory-billed woodpecker, which looks like a slightly different colored version of the pileated, and that's the one that went extinct, although there was a big hoo-ha 10 years ago, 15, 5, somewhere in the last decade, that someone thought they saw one in one of the swamps in Louisiana. Tons of people went out there looking for it, and nobody found it. The problem for that woodpecker was the same thing. They depended on old growth forests, and certain trees, and they were all cut as part of timber. And unfortunately, that's what happens. And woodpeckers, sometimes because of either a small range or because of these very specific habitat needs, can become threatened because of that. Like I said, hairy and downy seem to be doing all right. Pileated and flickers even might be on the upswing. But you can see here, this is a really spotty habitat map for a range that probably once really included red-cockaded. This might be a little spotty because it's more accurate about where you can find the pine savannas that they like. But they're a fraction of where they would. In fact, I think that, if I remember correctly, that these red slashed lines are where you find them now, as opposed to their old range, which is purple. So you can see there's little bits of them in different states here. And to get into some of the places to really see them, sometimes you've got to get into programs where they have permission to go in the areas where you might find them. And if I remember correctly, it's also one of these birds where, like, if you're not there when they leave in the morning, where they hang out in the tree for like maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes, and then they go foraging and they don't come back for hours, you might never run into them. So a lot of times when you have these trips where people go to see them, they're there like early in the crack of dawn, because they know where the birds are going to emerge, and they want to see them before they're gone, and who knows when they'll be back. So this would easily be the toughest one. Again, also the red cockades that they have are on the neck and they're very small and slight. And again, named by somebody who probably shot the bird and stuck it on the pan before they begin describing it. And so sometimes you'll get names like that that just are marks that you're easily and readily able to see in the field. How do I find woodpeckers? You just got to find out where they hang out. Obviously, forested areas are better. There are some woodpeckers that are pretty surprising in how they've adapted to open and even treeless areas. Feeders can be really good for downy. And I've seen, you saw, the pictures I had, both the pictures of the red belly were on feeders. One was a feeder here at the nature center. The other was a feeder at my house. So putting out a suet feeder is a really good way to attract them in your backyard. The if you're out in the forest, it's right there. A lot of times you might see them come in and land, but sometimes it's hard to spot them because they can be pretty well camouflaged against a tree. I like it when they're on the side of the tree because then obviously they stand out from the contour of the tree. But being able to see them when they fly by and land on trees is also very helpful. Keep an ear out for the calls as well. It's not certainly if you hear drumming, you know there's a woodpecker. It's hard to tell different species drumming one from the other. But if you can get the calls down, that can be a pretty rewarding way of at least experiencing a woodpecker, even if you don't get to see them. They're not just limited to trees. This is actually the outer facade of the nature center, and this guy was just hanging out on the stone facade there, trying to get back into the feeder. The other thing that's cool about downies is they will also feed on large annual plants that can support that weight. Here's a downy on a moth mullen. This is, I believe, out in Colorado. I'm looking at that now, and that bill seems long, and I don't see any spots. I might have to go back and look at that photo. Maybe that's a hairy, but it's on a moth mullen here out in this is out in Colorado. But again, this is a really large and strong stalk and sturdy stalk, and it can certainly hold them. They've all downies have also been seen foraging on cattails. Any kind of plant that's going to have the food that they want in there. Here is a red belly right in the center there. You can see that's pretty good camouflage. It's not perfect, but it's certainly not. They don't stand out like a bright purple and green woodpecker would. So sometimes I think we get spoiled by images of leaf-shaped bugs and orchid-shaped manads, but just colors that aren't super flashy can make an animal really, really hard to spot as well. Woodpeckers hold on to trees with their feet. Their feet are zygodactyl. The majority of perching birds have anisodactyl feet. So they have 3 toes forward and 1 toe back. Woodpeckers have 2 forward and 2 back. Occasionally, depending on the woodpecker, they might rotate one of those toes upward to the a side position or even forward to help with holding on to the tree, depending on how they're holding on. But generally, most woodpeckers, if they're on the side of the tree, they're using this zygodactyl arrangement of toes to hold on to the tree. Here's a nice picture of what that foot looks like. And here's a really good image of a hairy woodpecker holding on to the side of a tree. Again, a lot of trees have really good texture, so there's a lot of nooks and crannies that they can use to hold with their toes. The thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is tails are also really, really important. The center feathers of a woodpecker's tail are stiff, and they often have a little bit of curve at the end, and the woodpeckers can use those when they aren't perching, but when they're on the side of a tree as a support against the tree. So here's a couple images of a downy as well, and you can see those tail feathers in the center. I'm sure the picture. I'm actually going to come back here. In each of these pictures, I got a downy, I've got a red belly, upper and bottom pictures here are pileated. Okay, and you can see in all 4 images, these woodpeckers have their tail pushed against the tree, and so that is an extra level of support against the tree. It can also help them in locomoting when they go up and down the tree. What's really neat about this, and this is something that doesn't happen, I think, in other birds. It's very unusual. I'm going to go back to the downy for a second. When woodpeckers molt, they get rid of these outer feathers first. Those outer feathers are molted and they come back in. And once all the outer feathers have been completely replaced, then they will molt those center 4 or 5, however many feathers in the center of their tail. And that make sure that they can still use their tail properly. So as long as they got these center ones, obviously they have no issue with bouncing against the tree. As they lose the outer ones, they keep those and molt those last. So once all the others have come back in, they can still use their tail to push against the tree. I don't know if it's how much worse it might be, but it certainly allows them to have that balance that they need against the tree until those center ones also come back in. This is from, and I highly recommend if you get into birds, Sibley has 2 books, and I'll mention them at the end, but this is the guide to bird life and behavior, which is an older publication, been around for a while, but it's very, very good, and got a lot of his really good illustrations in it. And this is showing a red-headed woodpecker moving up a tree. And you can see here, on the left, it's in its resting phase, or at least I'm looking around trying to figure out what I want to do here phase. And then when it gets ready to move up, it begins to lean into the body, in towards the tree, and takes a little bit of pressure off the tail. And then when it gets its body all the way in, it pushes off with its feet straight up, and then immediately brings its feet forward really quick and grabs on further up. It's almost like if you were trying to pull yourself up, I don't know, American Ninja style, I guess, where you're grabbing something, you pull up, or you push yourself up and grab and keep going like that. And that's how they move up the side of the tree. And obviously, if they fall, they can fly and flit around and go back to where they want. But this is how they would move up the side of a tree. So if you've ever been trying to get a good look at a woodpecker, or a picture of a woodpecker, and it lands on a tree and starts going up the side, it's doing variation of this locomotion, and it's obviously very successful and helps them get up and down the tree. The slideshow here. In flight, you'll see finches do this as well, but it's a very distinctive flight. And you see a woodpecker flying, and it's flap, 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 and it dips and flaps up and it dips. And so they have this up and down, this undulating flight, and you get the flap, 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 dip, flap, 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 dip. And that's pretty characteristic of most woodpeckers, and certainly when you see the size of the bird, that can help you out. Goldfinches do this a lot too. Just a little bonus ID tip on the side. And to me, especially when they're flying, you often hear their characteristic potato chip as the mnemonic for learning their call. You'll hear that when they're flying as well. But it can be really helpful. Again, if you see something like a pileated flying through the air, it's hard to mistake that for any other bird. But some of the other birds, if they're smaller, or if you didn't get a good look before they went by, we see that flap, 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 dip, flap, 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 dip. That's a really good idea. You're probably looking at a woodpecker in flight. And again, as I mentioned, sometimes you'll see them foraging on the ground. Just because the woodpeckers doesn't mean they're always in trees. And even some of the woodpeckers will land on down trees, because there's bugs in there even if they're on the ground. I've seen pileateds on logs that have been used to line trails, or just down logs like this one here, sitting inches above the ground, but they're horizontal, like they're still on the side of the tree, just pecking away at that wood. And again, this big pile of wood shavings here, those really deep holes, that's pileated woodpecker damage. So speaking of which, what's for dinner? Bugs. As I mentioned, the sapsucker likes to eat bugs that get trapped in the sap wells, and certainly will eat the sap that's oozing out of the wells if it's done there as well. Oh, I think I got myself ahead of myself. But bugs are a big one. You could have termite. I don't know so much about termites, but any kind of wood boring insect that's in trees is certainly a big one. These are bark beetle galleries for the larva, and so this is what the woodpeckers are looking for. They're listening sometimes to hear things moving around, but they're also definitely looking for their eyes. Some woodpeckers probe and some excavate. So if you've got like a flicker, the flicker is going to land, it's going to probe the crevices and look for what it can find. Some other woodpeckers, like pileateds, Downy and Hairy, they do a lot more excavating like this. When you see a tree with these massive holes, especially that rectangular shape, that's pretty indicative that you're looking at pileated woodpecker damage. This is my wife's hand for scale. This was somewhere in New York. We were on a drive, and I stopped so I could take this picture, and so she helped give me some scale. And again, here's logs on the ground, and those massive hunks and chunks that are tore out of there. That's also indicative that this was pileated damage. This is what sapsucker wells look like. These are really old here on the left. They're probably not in use at the time of this picture. But if you look at this tree here on the right, this is obviously a tasty tree or had good flow. Each of these lines are multiple sapsucker wells all the way up. I mean, just lines and lines. Must be 20 or 30 lines there. And there's a lot more. And this is something you can see on trees. Sometimes I think sometimes it's just a matter of taking a second to pay attention or look at the trees in your yard, and you might be surprised to find that there's a couple trees that have this, or in your favorite park where you're walking, just pay attention to trees and look for these lines, and you'll realize that, oh my gosh, there's I've been walking past a tree with sapsucker wells on it for weeks or months or years, and never really noticed it. I know on the other side from the nature center of our owl enclosure, there's a couple trees there that are really popular with the sapsucker that we get every winter. This guy is fantastic. This is an acorn woodpecker. We don't have them around here. I like to show critters from around other places sometimes too. And this acorn woodpeckers live in small family groups, so it's not all for one. They have these little family groups that work together and they communicate with each other, and they make these deposits, which are called granaries. And this is one of the few woodpeckers that actively pecks holes to stick food in. And they're storing these acorns that they eat. And you'll find this not just on trees, but telephone poles and fence posts as well. And it's a really bright and very pretty bird. I was hoping to see one when I was out in California over a year ago, and I didn't get to be in the right spot. But it's one of my really want to see birds. As far as just again how pretty they are, but also I just want to see this in person. I've seen several pictures and they're fantastic. But they make these really large areas and they defend them with their family group pretty vigorously from other critters because that's their food. And again, they will also, they won't it doesn't have to be just critters that are under or on the bark as well. This downy here has got a beak full of um, caddisflies that had emerged. This was during emergence. This was during a bird trip to Harper's Ferry, and I remember seeing this downy, and it was very excited. And it's probably going to have 10 or 15 caddisflies in its bill there, and it's just really super excited. I don't know if it was already feeding some young or if it was just happy to have all that food, but it's definitely real excited to be eating all that. And you can also see that really nice big toenail right there, really stand out from its feet. So if getting dinner is the hard part, you also want to think about storing it. There's evidence that downies and hairies, I remember about pileated, I forget what the other, maybe it was flickers, will also cache their food, find a hole or a crevice and stash some of their food for later as well. And certainly, obviously, you saw that the acorn woodpeckers are another one to do that. But besides dinner, you also need a mate and you also need to produce a nursery. Okay. I'm going to talk about what it sounds like for a woodpecker to peck, but I want to show you that first. On the left is a pileated. That's a very straight, strong bill. That is perfect for banging your face against a tree, for either looking for food or excavating a hole. On the right is a flicker. That curved point there, this is a slightly more delicate tool. This is not one for just rapping and banging on a tree. That's not going to do you any good, and you can end up damaging that bill. And so this is a bird that does a lot more. The flicker on the right does a lot more probing, a lot more visual searching. And that also is a difference in their tongues, which I'll talk about in a little bit. For birds that do a lot more excavation, for the pileated, the hairy, the downy, and the woodpecker, the redheads here, look at all those. This is just a fantastic picture. But those wood chips and those wood shavings and that sawdust has to go somewhere, obviously. And if you don't have protected nostrils, it can get in there. It's just kind of like wearing a mask. They have a lot of feathers over their nostrils that help keep all this from getting into their nostrils so they can keep breathing. They also have several other adaptations as well, including thick muscles that protect them, sponge-like bones, especially extra muscles and bones between their head and their bill to protect them from the shock of what they're doing. They have an extra eyelid that they can close while they're pecking, because right before they impact, they will close their eye, and they use really good angles. So this is, I'm not entirely sure which woodpecker this is. It's actually it's not in English, so it could be a European species, but this is a great video that I wanted you to be able to see you might not get sound because I don't know if I enabled sound when I started the presentation, which is fine. I just want you to see the action of the woodpecker's beak as it bangs on the wood. that's some pretty serious, again, banging of your head against a really, really hard object. This is the reason people wear bicycle helmets. This is the reason we have, airbags in cars. Concussion can occur when your head is stopped and your brain keeps moving, and that inertia, bangs your head against your brain against the inside of your skull. And certainly, the birds are risking that every time they do it. And so they have these adaptations for protecting them. No, I don't want 5 seconds. I want to go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. Oh, before I talk about the tongue, hold on. Let me we'll watch him hit one more time because it's fantastic. Get the impact and all those feathers move. The other thing to remember is there's more muscles that go into this kind of pecking, because this is the pecking that a woodpecker does to find food. So it's actively trying to bang that wood, it's trying to excavate that wood, it's trying to break that wood apart and get in there and find stuff. For drumming, which is communicating, making a loud noise, you're not picking wood that's got a lot of bugs. You're picking wood that sounds really good. This can include gutters and downspouts, which I had one when I lived in Colorado. We had a flicker that absolutely loved our downspout, especially at 5 a.m., which was irritating. But when they're drumming, they're advertising for a mate, or they're advertising that this is their territory. They want that sound to go really far. So when you hear that really loud when you're walking in the woods, that woodpecker wants to be heard. When you hear the peck, 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 which is much less, that's actively looking for food, or maybe excavating a home. They don't want to be loud. They don't want to announce their presence because they're trying to get food and not be noticed by predators. So that's a very different sound, and it's also a different set of muscles. When they're drumming, it's more the head and the neck, because you get that which is going really fast, where there's a little more body muscle use during excavating for food or for a home. The other thing I want to show you is the hyoid apparatus. Okay, the hyoid apparatus is the bone that allows them to stick their tongue out. Some woodpeckers can stick their tongue out 5 inches past their bill. Okay, so you can see that here. This sticking out here, this bony hyoid apparatus, which goes back. It goes under the jaw. Okay, hopefully, I don't know if you guys can see my mouth, but you can see towards the back of the mouth, there's those 2 white lines there. That's part of the hyoid apparatus. It goes under the jaw around either side, and it comes around the back of the head, and depending on the species, may insert around the eye or at the base of the nose. Okay, that hyoid apparatus, again, here on this upper left, you can see the long tongue of the red-bellied woodpecker. That's how they can stick their tongue out so long. Here's another view of it. You can see it coming out. It's from the mouth, and it's going around the head, and it's actually inserting back in the nose. And they can extend those sheaths in the bone so they can stick that tongue out. The tongue is often sticky or barbed. In the picture on the right, that's the tip of a tongue, so that when they do encounter an insect, they can, impale it or get it to stick to their tongue and bring it back into their mouth. A bird with a longer tongue like that is actually probably more of a bird that is probing and visually looking for something in crevices, like a flicker. Okay, they're not a bird that does the excavation. A bird that's really excavating, like downies and hairies and pileateds, tend to have a shorter tongue because they're just yanking out the wood. So they're not looking to have that long tongue. But these guys with that longer tongue tend to be more of surface feeders, and that's where they find their insects. Here's another view of the tip of a woodpecker tongue. It's a pretty sticky tongue. One of the things that's really neat about woodpeckers, and something to remember, is when they're making all these holes, especially holes that they're having, that they're building as a nest. These are really, really important. These are Gila, Gila, Gila woodpeckers. And if there's not ready trees, they'll nest in cactuses. I don't know if this is a saguaro, but I know they will. That's one of the cacti they will, in fact, nest in. And these nests can be really, really important, just like holes in trees. Most woodpeckers don't reuse their nest the following year. And so they're essentially improving the habitat for other critters that might want to use the tree cavity as a nest, but aren't essentially able to excavate their own hole, such as elf owls, other owls. This elf owl will actually use the holes in cactus as well, although this looks like a pine tree cavity. But they'll also use a cavity in a cactus. Things like squirrels, raccoons, again, other species of owl as well. Anything that's a cavity nester flying squirrels, they'll use leftover woodpecker holes or tree cavities once they've excavated them and they don't use them anymore. So they are a pretty important species in the forest as well. So I hope you learned something to take with you. This is, I still don't know if this is true or not, but this is a fascinating picture. The guy certainly stands by it. I don't think have a lot to gain, but this is a green woodpecker photographed in a park in London that had a unfortunate weasel on the back of it trying to make a meal, and the woodpecker, I think, looks appropriately terrified. And there are people that argue either way. I don't know entirely if it's true, but I thought it was a fascinating way. Again, woodpeckers can be an important food species for other critters, and they can certainly be important for improving the habitat. So thanks, everybody. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm going to end my slideshow here and stop sharing my screen if anybody wants to ask any questions. Susan?
So what are predators for woodpeckers?
So bird-eating birds can certainly do it. So we have accipiters like Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks, and my assumption is that they would certainly do that. And I think any hawk that if it got a decent bead on a woodpecker would certainly take a run at them. Certainly their eggs and young are possible prey for raccoons and for rat snakes. Rat snakes will eat any bird they can catch if they get too close, unfortunately. So those are some of the predators that will certainly eat woodpeckers. And again, I don't know if I'd mess with a woodpecker myself because obviously they can give you a good peck. They got a really stout beak and they know how to use it. But there are still larger birds and critters that make a meal out of them if they have the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Adolfo?
Yeah. Why does the red plumage keep on coming back for like most species of woodpecker? Like they all seem to have like some kind of red on either their head or pretty much their head.
I think that I'm going to make a guess here. I'm going to say that out front that I'm not an evolutionary biology expert, but my guess is that probably is that you probably have a color pattern that is conserved in a lot of species of woodpeckers. And that color pattern is very successful as far as camouflage and making them cryptic. And so having that little red patch, it might be helpful in courtship, but it also doesn't make them stand out like a cardinal might. And so you've got that pattern that's really, really successful, and you see variations of it throughout the whole family. It's important to remember that whenever we have these classifications, that's something that we created. The animals didn't make that up. That's a way for us to understand biology and these relationships and how they work. And so we group them because of characters like that. And I think that, if this group all came from a common ancestor, that's variations of the different colors there. That's my best guess.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I saw another hand up.
I did not raise my hand. This is Eileen.
Okay, go ahead, Eileen, and I see someone else's hand up, and maybe they don't know what's up.
I could wait. Someone who did it properly. You had mentioned a word using the tongue about a higher apparatus or something. What is that word?
Hyoid, Hyoid. And Simply Guide to Bird Life and Behavior, which is a fantastic book. Let me see if I can find it. Here. The long, extensible tongue of woodpeckers, like that of hummingbirds, is made possible by the greatly elongated hyoid apparatus, a set of bones and muscles that controls tongue movements. And that's what's enabling them to do that. That's that hole that starts here and goes at the base of the tongue, goes back and wraps all the way around their head. That's the hyoid apparatus.
And where's the tongue with all that?
The tongue's in the mouth, so it's the base of the tongue, but the bone extends through the tongue. So these are the bones that allow the tongue to extend that far. Because if the tongue had the bone, it would just probably flop around a lot. There's a bunch of muscle, but that tongue actually helps it extend out. And while I'm doing books, before I forget, what it's like to be a bird by David Allen Sibley is fantastic. You don't have to read through this. You can open something to read about one group, and then it'll tell you about other pages to go to, or you can read about some ideas. And each of these lists is like, some birds can do this. Go to this page to read more about a group that does. I think it's a fantastic intro to birds It doesn't have to be read straight through or searched through. I really like both these books. He writes good stuff about birds. I hope he knows that and he keeps writing them. Eileen, do you want to hit me with that question?
I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Did I raise my hand? How do I unraise it?
Is that Jackie?
Yeah, I had a question. Does it make sense to leave up a dead tree, or
Yes,
is the
very
dead?
much
I have a
so.
dead dogwood, and I'm just wondering whether I should leave it up for the woodpeckers and
Absolutely.
guys.
Dead trees and snags are very important for habitat, not just for woodpeckers, but it certainly does help them. You know, and if you can leave it up and if it's safe and nobody's going to get crushed by it, absolutely. I often, working in parks, we've had to report trees because they looked like they were posed a danger to an area where people frequented. But if we can, or if we can get them to cut it just partially down, and leave it up, as a standing snag is certainly an important piece. And again, because of the way we've treated some forests, we've lost woodpeckers and certainly endangered others because of that. So whenever you can leave these standing snags up and it's safe, I absolutely recommend it because it's definitely good for the woodpeckers.
Well, thank you, and thanks for a great presentation on these guys.
Sure, no problem. Adolfo, I see your hand up again.
Yeah. Do
That's
all
okay.
woodpeckers have to be peck wood to be classified as a woodpecker, or is it just like a specific
No.
bone that they all have, or is there specific species that don't even peck at all?
So again, I don't know that flickers. I don't know if I've ever seen flickers really pecking a whole lot. I'm pulling that book back out to see if I can see if it has something at the front there. Not a silver. They are generally, the group are known for being arboreal. They live in trees. They creep up the sides of trees. They peck on wood. But there are some that don't. There are some, surprisingly, that have adapted to living in tundra, in deserts, or in treeless grasslands, and they've adopted other ways. They tend to. Remember, I don't know if you remember, I showed the two bills of the beak. I showed you the flicker and I showed you the pileated. The pileated is very chisel shaped. That's a wood pecking bill. But the slightly curved bill of the flicker, while they are still they can still perch on the side of a tree. They also perch a lot, like you would assume most birds do. But that slightly curved bill is not a pecking on wood necessarily thing. It's for doing other things. So they have enough similarity that they've been grouped in with the woodpeckers, but they're not what the first bird you would think of as a woodpecker. But generally, most woodpeckers pecking on, they have the zygodactyl foot. I can't even do it. They have two forward and two back with the toes. They go up and down the side of trees and they peck in wood. That's generally what you got. You have a few that have different adaptations.
Okay, thank you.
I need to unraise my hand. There we go. Okay, Aaron.
Sure. First off, thank you for the presentation again.
No problem.
So I'm aware that like red-headed woodpeckers have, the past 40 years have faced like substantial declines. Are there certain threats that are particular to the Arlington area or the Alexandria area for woodpeckers?
If you're around here, and you're a woodpecker, you're probably doing okay when there's people nearby. You need standing trees to nest, and you need standing dead trees for food. If you're a woodpecker that requires, I don't know if this is quite the same, but there are like certain songbirds that absolutely positively need large swaths of uninterrupted land. One of the issues around here is we have brown-headed cowbirds, and there's a lot of people that sneer at them. I think they're really, really cool birds. They evolved in the presence of following large herds of mammals, and you can't follow a bison herd, for example, but then stop and have a nest full of youngsters that you have to take care of. And the bison herd takes off and you're like, oh no, what do I do? And so they evolved to be brood parasites where they leave their egg in the brood of another bird. Their egg hatches first, pushes the other siblings out, the steplet siblings out, or kills them. And then it's the only one that's successful for the youngsters. So that bird brood, that species failed, but the cowbird lives on. The problem with that is they're not a deep woods bird. But when you have a lot of edge space like we do here, we have a forest and edge and a forest and edge instead of one big forest. That's more edge area where some of these birds are susceptible to that brood parasitism. So if you've got woodpeckers that require a certain habitat or a certain amount of habitat, that can be a problem in an urban and suburban area like we are in Alexandria and Arlington, where we don't have those big forest swaths like other places do. For a red-headed woodpecker, they like a spot that has a lot of dead trees typically in or around a swamp. And you don't find a lot of that around here anymore. That's why they were actually really successful at Huntley Meadows. There was a spot I used to work up in Reston, and there were some areas along the stream where they had a lot of dead trees, and it seemed like a really good spot for redheads. I don't know if they ever saw them, but there was some success. Again, like I said, it was really cool to see those redheads at Huntley, but I don't know if they've been there in the last year or so. Just kind of a bummer. But yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of the right habitat. There's habitat loss is always going to be an issue as long as people are around, unfortunately. Susan?
Why is suet recommended for, I'm new to this and I had suet this year, but I'm not sure why for the woodpeckers.
Well, a lot of them don't like seeds. Some of them will eat seeds, certainly flickers will, but a lot of them don't come to necessarily seed feeders. But a suet feeder, which is rendered fat, and sometimes has some other nibbles in it, they really, really like that. And that certainly is helpful, especially in the winter when they need that high protein and high caloric intake food.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else? Well, before, so I want to say thank you. And before I say goodbye, I'm also going to say goodbye. This is my last deep dive because I've accepted a position somewhere else. I haven't told a lot of people that. I know, sorry. Thank you for that. Yeah. And so, I don't know what'll happen with the next couple of deep dives that are scheduled, if they'll be able to go or not. But I want to thank you. I've been doing this for 4 or 5, 6 years. I don't know. And it's been really fun and I've really enjoyed doing it. But yeah, this was my last one. So thank you for joining me tonight. This is why I'm so upset that the stupid computer lost my presentation because I zhuzhed it up a bit and tried to make it look nicer, but I think it went okay. So thank you all for joining me tonight. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to hang out for another minute or two if anybody has any questions.
Thank you.
So, sure.
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you.
No
Good luck.
Are you
problem.
leaving Arlington?
Yeah, I got a position as a nature center manager in another organization. So
Oh,
I'll still be in Northern Virginia. I just won't be in Arlington.
our loss there.
Our
Gail.
loss.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank
Congratulations
you.
on your new job.
Well, thank you. We've had a couple positions open now for a while, and they've been going through the process. And I think that there will be some really neat new naturalists starting soon. And so there will certainly be some great people still working here. And there certainly are now. I mean, I want to make sure I say that properly. But yeah, it's been it's tough getting fully staffed, but they should be fully staffed in the next month or two. And I think you're going to have some really good naturalists to come to programs and meet and work with. So,
Can we ask where you're going?
yeah, I mentioned Reston. I'm actually going back to Reston. I accepted the nature center manager position at Walker Nature Center.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if they
Congratulations.
know yet, if anybody there knows yet, but that's where I'll be going. So I haven't said anything to anybody from Reston. I hope no one hears from Reston and spills the beans.
Question.
Yeah.
When you said that the woodpeckers don't rarely reuse their homes, that some species do. Are any of the species found here around Arlington, do they reuse their nests?
I'm not sure. I feel like the majority of the woodpeckers around here, they make a home and then they don't use it the
Yeah.
following year, and so they're constantly creating new nests each year.
Okay.
Trying to see if I can find. Oh, this actually says a pair may excavate 2 cavities, one for breeding and one for roosting in the fall.
Huh. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and they will use living or dead trees. It doesn't have to be just a dead tree.
Okay.
Some species, each adult has a cavity. So yeah, I know I've heard that fact before, and now I'm like trying to find it so I can give you a better answer. Most woodpeckers do not reuse a cavity in subsequent years. Old nests may no longer be in sufficiently good condition, may harbor nest parasites that would harm young woodpeckers, and may be especially vulnerable to predation, as mammalian predators are known to remember cavity locations.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, the idea that there would be nest parasites in there, I think, is a really important idea to remember too, because
Yeah.
if you, so starting fresh, essentially making a brand new bed, and I think that's important probably for the youngsters.
Oh, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. again, these two Sibley books, fantastic. They're great for a lot of good bird background stuff, and those are the first two books I go to when I do a presentation like this, is to find the information in there. It's really good stuff.
Would you say a little bit about how the woodpecker protects its brain when it does the pecking? You mentioned spongy muscles, but can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's extra thick layers of muscle between the bill and the head. And then there's also protective bone that's almost like spongy, and it's crenellated, so there's a lot of impact absorption material between the bill and the head from both bones and from and muscles that help to dull that impact. My guess is there's probably some adaptations inside the brain cavity as well. I used to teach when I was working in a museum in Denver. I used to teach about helmet safety on bikes. One of the things we did when we go out to some of these fairs, and we had a little skull with a plastic toy brain that just fit just inside the skull. And so we show people, when your skull comes forward and you hit something, you can see the brain jumping, and like that's when you can have brain injuries, things like concussions. And so woodpeckers are doing that all the time to excavate. Certainly the ones that like pileated, the one in the video, Downy and hairy. And so they've got to have those adaptations. Those are the ones we know of, these thick muscles and the spongy absorptive bones. But I mean, they've got to have something going on there as well. And again, neck muscles and strong structure are on the head and neck of the bones and the muscles as well, not just in front between the bill and the head, but around the head and neck as well. So really, really important for absorbing all that impact that they're essentially self-inflicting. Tamara, I want to make sure I say that right.
Thank you.
Tamara.
Sure.
What
Okay.
was the name again of the two books, the two Sibley books again? There was
David Allen Sibley. It's the Sibley Guide to Bird Life and Behavior and what it's like to be a bird. To be honest, if you go, and you don't have to use Amazon, but Amazon's always the first place I go to look for stuff because it's just easiest. If you look up David Allen Sibley, because he's the author of both, that'll get you those books, and it's a good way to find them. And again, they're fantastic. I think What It's Like to Be a Bird just came out a year or two ago. It was a very pointed birthday gift that I requested when that came out. The Sibley Guide to Bird Life and Behavior is my favorite story because I told my uncle, I'm like, this guy's really good and he writes a really good book. And he went out and bought the book. And then I said, how do you like it? And he says, it's really good. What did you think? I said, I have never read it. I just heard it was really good. And he got mad at me because he bought the book. And this is actually his copy that I ended up getting years later. So it's my favorite story about that book. But they're really, really good. I'm glad I bought it so I could get it because it's a really good book. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. If there's no other questions, thank you, everybody. It's 8:03, and I'm going to go ahead and sign off and go home and see if I can say goodnight to my daughter. So you all have a great evening.
Thank you very much. You take care and good luck and congratulations.
Thank you, Eileen. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks
Congratulations.
for coming tonight. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
I appreciate it. Appreciate it.